Our next speaker is John Armstrong. John started his career with the military. He's a trauma surgeon. He was working at the University of Florida, was recently recruited to the University of South Florida, not only as a trauma surgeon, but as the director of the new Simulation and Skills Training Center for the University of South Florida. John has been involved with the college extensively, and he currently runs the American College of Surgeons PAC, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about some of the other techniques that surgeons can use to influence healthcare reform. John?
Thank you, Dave, and certainly thanks to Dave Ratner and the program committee for the opportunity to be here to share with you some insights on how we can become more energized as advocates for surgeons and the surgical patient. I have no conflicts to disclose. We are on at the 1-year anniversary of the passage of the Accountable Care Act. And President Obama, when he signed this into law, stated, "We did not fear our future, we shaped it." I would suggest that we still have an opportunity to shape our future, and at the end of a brief 15 minutes, hope that you will meet the following objectives. One, that you'll be able to discuss some of the key political events that occurred in the health system reform timeline. Two, that you'll be able to describe current opportunities to influence health system reform, some of which Dr. Warshaw has already touched on. And three, explain how you can engage to shape health system reform and other issues of import to surgeons and surgical patients. Well, let's move down the timeline briskly. I think many of us remember this picture of President Obama as a surgeon. He stated in his campaign for president that health system reform was going to be his #1 issue, and that is what he pursued relentlessly through his first year plus in office. Well, something happened along the way, and I call this the serendipity of 60, and it highlights how important political issues are in moving policy forward. You see, to get anything done in the legislature, you not only need a majority of a House of Representatives, 435 members, you need to have a majority in the Senate that is a supermajority to actually close debate. And that's 60 votes. The technique for closing debate is called cloture. And so you heard this repeatedly throughout 2009. Doesn't look like the Senate is going to be able to close debate. What that means, in essence, is that issues move forward in more of a bipartisan fashion. Well, something happened. So on Election Day, November 2008, there were 51 Democrats and 49 Republicans in the Senate. Ted Stevens in the lower left lost his election to Mark Begich. Ted Stevens was convicted of fraud the week before, and that contributed to his election loss. You may now remember that in February 2010, Attorney General Holder asked the judge in that trial to set aside the verdict because of prosecutorial misconduct. What if Ted Stevens had not been convicted? Well, when the Senate opened on January 3rd, with the landslide victories in November, there were 58 Democrats and 41 Republicans. And then Arlen Specter went to bed a Republican and woke up a Democrat. And then the number moved to 59. And finally, in Minnesota, Norm Coleman gave up the ghost to Stuart Smalley, also known as Al Franken, and thus the Senate achieved 60 Democrats to 40 Republicans and was thought to have a lock on any legislation. I think a political lesson that was learned is that not all Democrats are equal, and it's awfully hard to keep 60 people together, too. Well, then things seemed to be cruising until Senator Kennedy died. His chief of staff, Paul Kirk, was appointed for the rest of his term, and it seemed, again, like there was going to be health system reform, and there was a certain arrogance that probably came out of this, and I believe this cover highlights that attitude. Damn the torpedoes. We aren't going to have to talk to people who don't agree. We're going to move this forward. And so if you look at the roads to reform from the House in November 2009 and the Senate December of 2009, on December 24th, 2009, there were 2 bills that were to be shaped as the Accountable Care Act through a conference committee and move forward to the White House. And because no Republicans had voted for either one of these, short of one Republican in the House, there wasn't even going to be a conference committee. They were simply going to move forward a combined bill as a Democratic caucus. Well, then something happened in January 2010 which completely altered the landscape. It was the tsunami of voters for Scott Brown in Massachusetts when Scott Brown was elected senator to fill the seat previously held by Ted Kennedy. And that meant it was 59-41. Well, President Obama and company were undeterred. And this cartoon says, with the health care bill he's holding, listen, if you can't open wider to swallow, we might have to try your other end. And the message here is that there were ways procedurally of actually getting the bill across. And the vehicle ended up being the Senate bill. And another way to deal with the elements of the Senate bill that the House didn't like was through a process called budget reconciliation. And I do like the comment of Speaker Pelosi on the eve of passing. What you see is a copy of the actual bill. We have to pass the bill so that we can find out what is in it. And while this has engendered a lot of political controversy, it does highlight a reality on Capitol Hill, that these bills are long, and it is very hard for any member of Congress to know exactly what is in these bills. That is the political reality. I'm not offering a commentary about that. I'm simply saying that is a political reality that we should understand. And as that bill passed along with the reconciliation bill, Obamacare version 2.1, there was a lot of consternation about just what was going to happen with these bills in the lives of the citizens of our country. I can see you're undecided to the mob. Well, we in America do not have government by the majority. We have government by the majority who participate. So said Thomas Jefferson. And honestly, what happened in the debates on health system reform is that the majority who participated said we're going to have an Accountable Care Act. We have to understand the nature of the Congress with a House of Representatives that depends on rules and precedents to somehow govern 435 people, and the Senate, which is a body of tradition and 100 equals. They rule by unanimous consent. Well, it's hard to get 100 equals to agree to anything, and that's why cloture was created, so that the Senate could actually close debate among equals if a supermajority said enough. That's where the magic number of 60 comes in. And to put this in further perspective, at the founding of our union, we had 26 senators. Now we have 100. With 26, unanimous consent can work. With 100, it does not. But we need to understand this political process. Now, this is a timeline of the health system reform law, only to highlight that the law has enormous complexities in it, and that it does have things that kick in over time, and we need to understand those better. But a fundamental part of this law is that it collects money for 10 years and provides the access, the benefit, for approximately 6 years. We need to keep that in mind. And what I would suggest to you as you looked at just that broad overview of health system reform timeline and the reality of cost to give access is that we have opportunities to shape health system reform even now. The law is not the end of the story. Now is not 2015, is not 2019. A lot can change. Providing insurance is not the same as access, and Andy highlighted our workforce challenges. The law has a lot of authorization for programs, but it doesn't actually have the appropriation, which is the money behind it. So Congress can tinker with that. And the legislation has to move through regulation, and they are not the same, as Andy highlighted. In that bill that I showed you, over 1,000 times it says, and the Secretary shall. This is Secretary Sebelius. This was an unprecedented law in the sense that the legislative body gave enormous power to the executive branch. That's not the way it usually works. There's usually a lot of tension. So there is a lot that really is unknown even now about how things will unfold, and that gives us an opportunity as advocates to influence what is happening. We have to understand what's on the minds of those in Congress and the mind of President Obama right now. It's 2012. It's the election. That is going to play into outcomes across regulation and further legislation, and we have to understand that's the nature of the enterprise. Well, if you have to get elected, you have to raise money to get elected, and this highlights out of the 2010 congressional election cycle just how expensive elections are and why it is that members of Congress are constantly working to raise money. You can also see that political action committees at the bottom are a significant source of fundraising for candidates for Congress. So the political realities are that candidate strength in the end is measured by campaign contributions, that organizational advocacy strength is really measured on political action committee contributions from the membership and market share, and nature abhors a vacuum. So if a group chooses not to participate in the political process, there are other groups ready to do it, and they step up to the plate. Well, as I move to the last section of this talk, I kind of get back to what President Obama shared when the Accountable Care Act was signed, but think about it as Peter Drucker has emphasized. The best way to predict your future is to create it. And I want to share an optimism that we can actually continue to shape how we care for the surgical patient, the best way for the surgical patient. Now, as the act was moving through Washington, there was a lot of press about what's gone wrong in Washington. Well, I will tell you, Washington is working exactly the way it was designed to work. That government which governs least governs best. It is designed through a balance of power across three branches of government to really spin a lot of wheels. It's not designed to actually create solid policy initiatives. It's designed to require representatives and senators to raise a lot of money because it's a distraction from governing if all you're focused on is getting elected or reelected. So I would wonder, though, it's really what's gone wrong with physician advocacy, and in particular, surgeons. This was a cartoon from the time. I'm suffering from headaches, anxiety, and an upset stomach, and the physician says, well, stop following the healthcare debate. I would suggest that's the wrong prescription for all of us. We need to continue to not only follow it, but we need to be part of it, and we need to move it in the right direction. And it really comes down to an issue of time and treasure. And time is money, money is time, but the bottom line is that if we're going to be effective in advocacy, we need to explicitly acknowledge the time and the treasure it's going to take to be effective individually and through our organizations. And I would suggest that we need to engage through political education so that we learn the advocacy process. This session is part of that. And that we work to stay informed on the issues so that we have the consistent message to move forward through the legislative advocacy process. The second thing is we need to come together as a Symposium, as a grassroots network, and we have to actually respond to the email alerts. 3% response rate doesn't work in Washington. We also need to visit with our members in Congress. And while everybody tends to focus on doing that in DC, I would suggest doing it in your district and your state is much more effective. You'll get the time from the member of Congress often. Establish a relationship, get to know that member, and then you can be more of an influencer on decisions from that member. And I've suggested that we all need to look at our professional portfolio as part of this engagement, define the organizations professionally to which we belong, support the foundations of those organizations in charity, and importantly, support political advocacy by supporting our political action committees and, where we wish, making individual campaign contributions. Now, the deal with getting involved with campaign contributions is shown here. As an individual, you can contribute up to $2,400 per election per candidate. So with a primary and general election, that's $4,800. That is a lot like putting a lot of money on a horse, if you want to know the truth. What a political action committee does is to pool together resources from members to make a much broader statement of support for a candidate, so in surgery in particular, pro-surgery candidates, and that's up to $5,000 per election, so $10,000 with the primary and general. The American College of Surgeons, Surgeons PAC, had some successes in the last congressional election cycle with a couple of independent expenditures, and I'm going to play one of these for you. Which one do you want to hear, the Democrat or the Republican? Both. I want to show you that we are
Surgeons
bipartisan.
and their patients know the importance of trust. In the operating room, patients trust their surgeon to make the right call when they can't. That's why surgeons are supporting Mark Kirk for United States Senate, because they know he can be trusted to make the right calls on Capitol Hill. Mark Kirk has fought to improve health care with legislation aimed at improving quality and access to care, stopping cuts to Medicare, and ensuring the government doesn't interfere with decisions made by you and your doctor. Whether it's creating jobs, fighting waste, or making sure you keep more of what you earn, Mark Kirk can be trusted to be a voice for you, not a rubber stamp for a political party or special interests. Mark Kirk has earned the trust of surgeons, and with so much riding on this year's election, cutting the deficit, getting America back to work, and safeguarding our children's future, we all need someone we can trust.
American College of Surgeons Professional Association Surgeons PAC paid for and is responsible for the content of this advertising. 202-672-1537, not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee PAC.
Life-threatening accidents can strike anyone at any time. Senator Patty Murray is fighting to ensure we have the best quality care when we need it most. Listen to trauma surgeon Eileen Bolger.
As a mom and a doctor, I take great comfort in knowing that Harborview provides world-class care with some of the best trauma surgeons you can find anywhere in the country.
Senator Patty Murray works hard to keep this world-class trauma care right here in Seattle. Here's Dr. Greg Jurkovich.
It's a great responsibility, but it's also a great privilege to help people in the toughest of times to fight for their life. But with the tools and the expertise and the personnel we have at Harborview, we're winning that fight.
Let's re-elect Senator Patty Murray so she can keep working for the health and safety of our families. Vote for Senator Patty Murray. It means more than you think. The American College of Surgeons Professional Association Surgeons PAC at 202-672-1537, paid for and is responsible for the content of this advertising. It is not authorized by the candidate or candidates committee, and the opinions are not those of either Harborview Center or the University of Washington.
I want to thank you for listening to both of those. They highlight that if health care is a bipartisan issue, then advocacy has to be bipartisan. And so our particular example, we supported a Republican and a Democrat. They both won in very tight races, and they attribute their success to our expenditure at a critical time in their campaign. Just another example of how we can be involved. Andy Warshaw highlighted our challenge as a group of surgeons. If you look at where our grassroots, right here in front of me, where we sit, we are at 4.1%, $1.3 million PAC. The orthopedic surgeons, the anesthesiologists, emergency physicians, ophthalmologists, pathologists, they are all doing much better. We should scratch our heads and say, how is it that surgeons aren't doing at least as well as these other groups? But then if you want to put another context on political action committees, look at where we stand relative to the SEIU, the National Association of Realtors, the trial lawyers with the American Association for Justice. There's not going to be tort reform with that. You get a sense that we can do much better. This is the competition. And a number of these groups did not have the best economic times when they were giving substantial sums of money. Well, in summary, I would suggest to you the practice environment is shaped by a political system, and we need to be aware of that there is no finish line in politics. Laws move from legislation to regulation, and we have a great opportunity to still shape health system reform. And finally, that political advocacy really needs to be part of our professional surgical practice. Now I'm going to alert our AV technicians for the video now. And I want to share with you the message that the American College of Surgeons, under the leadership of Dave Hoyt, has come up with to bring us together as a surgical community in advocacy. Thank you.